All right. Thank you so much, Bethany, for joining me today. My name is Mariah Cornoa. I am the Executive Director of NAMI Greater Toledo, and I have had such a pleasure in learning about you, meeting you, and I'm so grateful to connect with you today to be able to share your story as part of our CIT panels. Let's
Very
just
happy to be here. Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much for your time. And I really just want to dig into hearing a little bit about your background, when things started to change for you, and then we'll kind of explore your direct interactions with law enforcement, what worked. This is our opportunity to share your story with law enforcement so that we can continue to destigmatize mental health. And then I want to finish on just what a triumph and a journey you've had, and to really celebrate your recovery. So let's get right into that. Can you tell me a little bit about how it all began for you? Maybe your early background, your connection with family, educational ambitions. Let's start there.
Well, first of all, it's really a pleasure to speak for law enforcement. You guys are such a vital part of our society, serving us through difficult times and good. Anyway, my name is Bethany Yeiser, and I have schizophrenia. I have treatment-resistant schizophrenia, but I'm happy to say it's been in full remission for about 17 years. So recovery today is possible. And today I serve as president of a foundation called CURES, which stands for Comprehensive Understanding via Research and Education into Schizophrenia. And we are always so honored to take any opportunity to speak with law enforcement. I had a wonderful childhood, no significant trauma, no encounters with police. I was happy. I was really dedicated to violin, practicing 4 or 5 hours a day. We lived on 5 acres of beautiful wooded land. I was very competitive. I was a National Merit Scholar in high school, got accepted to USC in Los Angeles, and started my biochemistry degree. Things were going very well. I was doing research, I was getting good grades, and then I wanted to just do something more. My mind was starting to get, you might say, a little bit fuzzy. Um, my grades started dropping, and I started taking these international trips. I remember my church was sending a team of young women to China. And I remember being in China thinking to myself, can I make a worldwide impact? And soon after that, the summer after my junior year of college, I went to Africa. I was wondering if I could impact the lives of millions of people living in Africa. And it was time for me to focus on school, do my best, prepare for my future. And instead, I started failing my classes, actually. I told myself, I'm not trying. I told myself if I wanted to get A's in these classes, I could. But that wasn't true. What happened was my mind was shattered with the beginning of schizophrenia, and my best efforts were producing failing grades. When I got back from Africa, as you may imagine, my parents were very concerned about my life, and then I told them I wanted to adopt 6 Nigerian children. I was going to drop out of school, and they didn't know where any of this stuff came from. It was like I was a different person. In my schizophrenia, essentially, I was a different person. So I dropped out of school, and a few months later, I just refused all help from family and friends. And I started living in the University of Southern California main library. I had an ID. These were my first encounters with some law enforcement. They would come to me in the library and say, hey, this library is for students. Can we check your ID? And even though I was failing my classes, I had an ID that was still active, and I was just left alone. I wouldn't be in touch with my loving, wonderful family who had done nothing wrong for about 5 years. I was worried they would stop me from making a worldwide impact. I was having very grandiose delusions. Again, I was afraid of my professors, my counselors, my pastor, my friends. And this was the beginning of 4 years of homelessness, including the last 13 years living outside in a churchyard very close to the university.
That's a lot already. I think something to call out here is, um, college is a hard transition for a lot of youth and young adults. Your
Mhm.
ambition and the level of pressure and classes you were attending initially were excelling at. And so I think it's important to note that a lot of these things were drastic differences from where you were. You had a very healthy relationship with your family, and then all of a sudden didn't. So, can you talk just a little bit more about were you aware sort of the emotional changes that were happening, or was it just because you've talked about wanting to make these huge impacts in your in addressing poverty and some of these things. Did that drive you, was that driving you so much that you didn't realize the changes that were happening?
I had no idea that anything was wrong with me, even when I was homeless. No idea. This is something called anosognosia, which is a fancy word that means lack of insight. Anosognosia happens when a person has a stroke and their leg is paralyzed, and the doctor comes in and says, "Move your leg." And they say, "I am,"
Right.
because they have absolutely no idea that that leg is paralyzed. But what you're talking about, I think, is when does normal become abnormal? And so kids in college are changing and developing and becoming more independent. So we expect them to break away from family. We expect them to have interests like traveling overseas and learning about other cultures. And it's very hard to say, when does this go from normal adolescent changes to something deeper, something like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder? So this was hard for anybody to see. I mean, when I became homeless, I'm sure my parents started to really think, something is very wrong with Bethany's mental health. But, it's interesting, even though they most likely suspected that something was very wrong with me, what could they do?
Across the
You
country.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was over 21. I wasn't hurting anybody. I wasn't like acutely psychotic at that time. I was delusional, but I was keeping my delusions to myself. I mean, if I'd seen a doctor at that time, they probably would have said, "How are you doing?" And I would have said, "I'm great. I'm going back to Africa. I'm taking some time off." I knew what to say. But yeah, yeah. As I was at that university library all the time, which lasted about 2.5 years, I did see police occasionally. I wasn't just sleeping in the library. I was sleeping in various lounges and sometimes classrooms, and I was usually just ignored and never caught. But there were a number of times over that period when I would see law enforcement, and sometimes they'd pressure me. You really shouldn't be on campus anymore. But I thought to myself, wait a minute here. I won this big scholarship to be on this campus. I used to do research. I used to have high grades. How can you tell me I'm not welcome here to sleep in classrooms and eat garbage? That was my thinking back then. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I really believe that being on campus is my rights.
And I think that's one of the important understandings is even with anosognosia, they do not believe. And here we are, the outside forces trying to force someone to believe something that just isn't true for them. So
Mhm.
I think that's really interesting. Talk more about your interactions with law enforcement. They were kind of kind, gentle to you in the beginning, right? And then, or actually, you were sent to jail those first couple times, correct?
That's a little bit later on in the story, but
Okay.
yes, I was. So, yeah, I became homeless March 3rd of 2003. And for the next 3.5 years, I would see police occasionally at USC, and they'd often tell me, you shouldn't be in these lounges. And again, I'm thinking, of course I can. And then I remember it was October 16th of 2006 when I was very dirty in my homelessness. I was looking for garbage to eat, and I went to a very fancy lounge where people go to pick up graduate diplomas and just lay down on a couch. I looked out the window and I saw LAPD. I had never seen LAPD on the university campus before, and they were there to pick up me. So I always thought, if the university's serious about me leaving, they'd probably take me give me some kind of ultimatum or remove me in one of their vans. I never dreamed they would call LAPD. But yeah, that was really hard. I remember talking to one of the policemen in the car and saying, "When this is all over, can you take me back home?" And he's like, "Yes, of course." And he was being sarcastic. And I remember I got in jail and we were packed in like sardines, very, very tight. And then the biggest thing about jail, especially the first time, was darkness. I was in this jail. It was as dark as a cave, literally. I'd never in my life been scared of the dark before. I didn't even know what that meant, but I was scared of the dark in prison. Do not let people tell you that it's okay for people with severe mental illness to be incarcerated for a short time or for a long time. In my opinion, it is not okay. I wish so much that those police officers had taken me to a hospital for evaluation instead of to a jail. I was hearing voices at that time all the time. I was having command hallucinations. I was as sick as you can possibly be. But when I was jailed, I was um I was not thinking about the voices as much. It's like the fear I felt distracted the voices. So yes, it was a little harder for staff to pick up on my psychosis, but still, they should have. And one of my biggest messages to the law enforcement is work as hard as you can to get people who need to be in hospitals into hospitals and, remove them from jails, avoid them going to jails because these people need medicine and treatment. These people do not need punishment.
Or fear, additional fear. They live with enough fear or um, can you talk about so that was one of the early times that you'd met with security, but this is law enforcement. They took you to jail. They didn't recognize diagnosis. How long did you stay and did they just let you go?
They did. Yeah, I was only there from like the 16th to the 18th. It was very, very short. And I remember I was released in downtown Los Angeles. And I relaced my shoes and walked from downtown LA to the churchyard, which is a very long walk and a bit of a dangerous one, but I did it. And seriously, you would think that when I was in jail, I would hit rock bottom, I would wake up, and I would think to myself, now I'll contact my loving family, or now I'll contact that friend I made who offered to let me live with her. Now I'll ask for help, but I didn't. And this is what I see in people with schizophrenia who are homeless, incarcerated again and again. It's like they never hit rock bottom. For me, rock bottom, the closest thing to it was my first involuntary hospitalization, which occurred 4 years after I was homeless. So.
Um, can you talk about that situation? Because that you said that was involuntary. You did not. How did that come about?
Sure, sure, sure. So, let me just complete the story here. So, I became homeless on March 3rd, 2003. I was jailed October 16 to 18. I was jailed again in late November. I forget the dates. It was over Thanksgiving. And that time, to be honest with everyone, I don't know why I was picked up and taken to jail. I was in the churchyard in the middle of the day, and some cops came up to me, asked me where I lived. And when I gave them my very convincing lie that worked for everybody, they didn't believe me. And they briefly took me to jail again. And that jail experience wasn't quite as bad, even though it was incredibly crowded. Like we were literally packed in there like sardines. So anyway, I was in jail twice. And then on March 3rd of 2007, which is my 4-year anniversary of becoming homeless, I had command hallucinations telling me to like scream and hit myself. I would like to say command hallucinations.
Talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was going to UC to finish my degree, University of Cincinnati, I went to this party. I was not disclosing my schizophrenia. And there's this law student who says people who hear a voice are culpable for their behavior because they hear a voice and then they can just choose to do what the voice says or not. That was not my experience. If I didn't do what those voices said, they would get louder and louder and louder. I would feel pain. I would feel horrible sensations. It was like the voices could make me do anything. So when you law enforcement are dealing with the person who's having command hallucinations, I think it's important to realize that these people are not in control of their behavior. The voices are in control of their behavior. And later on, the miracle would be that on antipsychotics, suddenly I would say, no, I'm not going to scream. No, I'm not going to shout profanity. But again, prior to the antipsychotic medication, it was like those voices could make me do anything. Through the Cures Foundation several months ago, I heard from a mom. Her daughter had command hallucinations telling her to set herself on fire. She knew how much that would hurt. She knew it could kill her. She did it anyway. So this is the nature of command hallucinations. If you are resting someone or seeing somebody who's having command hallucinations, I encourage you to be very, very gentle, very matter of fact. Try not to intimidate them. If you can avoid it, try not to use handcuffs. But recognize that these people are not in control of their behavior.
Yeah. I think that's a huge important piece. Um, did we talk about, so that was that is that the time, the command hallucinations when they picked you up then, that led you to the involuntary um admission?
The command hallucinations radically changed my behavior. And it's really something looking back. If I hadn't started to have command hallucinations, where would I be today? Would I still be living outside in Los
Yeah,
Angeles?
right.
Too very, very sick, but not sick enough to get involuntary help? I don't know. But yeah, I was involuntarily hospitalized. Excuse me. I was involuntarily hospitalized because of the bizarre behavior from the voices. So.
So tell me about your journey forward from there. And actually, I want to make sure that we talk about where you are today and what has helped you. And then if there's any additional advice for law enforcement, I think you've done a great job in just kind of painting the picture of what that feels like in that moment, that it's not about being non-compliant, it's about compliance to the commands they're hearing, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah, that's true.
yeah, tell us about your journey forward. How did you start to find recovery?
So the involuntary hospitalization was horrible, even though I have to say there was time to go outside. We had a ping pong table and a piano. I still hated being there. They got me a medication after I completely resisted for some time. And then, yeah, the miracle happened. The command hallucination said scream, and I chose not to. I was in control. Visual hallucinations pretty much gone, paranoia, delusions pretty much gone. But I didn't have a clue that that medication helped at all. I had no insight. So I traveled from LA after discharge to Cincinnati to recover at my parents' home. And that's when the side effects showed up, the akathisia, this restlessness, blunt affect, no smiling, no feelings of joy. I could not stop eating, sleeping at least 16 hours a day, waking up exhausted. I did the normal thing that everybody does on pills. Almost everybody does. I just went off of them. People with schizophrenia, historically, statistically, they do not take oral medication. And so, big surprise, I go off my medication. The command hallucinations are back. I'm very psychotic. And then my parents and one of my dad's secretaries called 911. I was hospitalized again. First Ohio hospitalization. This time, the doctor sat down with me and he said, look, do you want to go back to school? Do you want to work? He said, that might be possible, but you must always stay on your antipsychotic medication. He showed me a graph. He's like, when you go off the medication on and again, it can be less effective, off and on, less effective again. And he explained that that's what led to disability. And I just developed a vision for my future. I didn't want to be disabled, and I badly, badly wanted to go back to work and or school. So I got out of the hospital knowing two things. One, I was going to take my medication every day. Two, I needed a different one because I was tired of being totally disabled. So yeah, a long story short, a year later, I met a doctor who was excellent, who looked deeper and wanted me to recover. It was his dream. It was his, I don't know, it's his mission to get me better. And I'm so grateful for that. He started me on a medication called clozapine. Within about 4 months, I was pretty much fully recovered. So I transferred to the University of Cincinnati, graduated in 2011, 3.84. So I did well. Then I wrote a book called Mind Estranged that came out about 2 years later. Started the Cures Foundation in 2016, and that's what I still do. I am very busy with Cures. We have different programs. Oh, thank you, Mariah.
Yeah.
We have like a caregivers mentoring program, clubs, Ask the Doctor events, a very encouraging support group with people in full recovery. On the call, we take medical inquiries. We also feature what we call schizophrenia survivors. These are people who are doing amazingly well despite schizophrenia. It is not just me.
Yeah.
I've been told before, you're the exception to the rule. Maybe you never had schizophrenia, even though I was textbook. So my second book, Awakenings, highlights these survivors. This includes a lawyer, medical researchers, social workers, a computer programmer, many, many others, a professional artist. So I encourage you to check out Mind Estranged and Awakenings and just recognize that this is a really, really big problem in our society. Very quickly, in 1965, a law was signed called the IMD exclusion. Lyndon B. Johnson signed it. And it basically said that if you have a psych hospital with over 16 beds, the federal government will not pay. So what happened was we had over 1 million beds in the 40s and 50s. Today, maybe 80 years later, we've got 40,000.
Yeah.
So only the very, very, very sickest of us end up in hospitals. And people who would have been in hospitals are incarcerated and sleeping on our streets. This is a tremendously difficult problem that needs a complicated and difficult solution. But you can be part of this solution by being kind, by being compassionate, by trying to understand the people dealing with these hallucinations and other symptoms, and just recognizing that these people need different treatment than your average criminal. These people need compassion and gentleness, and they need you to be on their side.
Yeah. Bethany, I can't thank you enough for sharing your story and for celebrating your recovery with us because I think something else I took away from meeting you and your talk was that getting somebody stable isn't enough.
Not
Like they
enough.
deserve,
It's
we
not enough.
all deserve peaceful, fulfilling lives. And so I just want to point out that you said you went back to school, but you went back to school to complete a degree in molecular biology. That's
Oh,
amazing. And here you
oh, not
are
really.
applying that through research and taking your path and turning it into purpose. I can't say thank you enough for the work that you're doing. And again, the example that it proves is through the right treatment, through consistency and medication, recovery really is possible.
It is. Never give up on your person with schizophrenia. A lot of people in the general public think that schizophrenia really is a life sentence. It used to be. But today we have newer antipsychotics, what I take, clozapine for treatment resistance. There's a lot of treatments, there's a lot of hope. And you can just, as I keep saying, never give up on us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bethany.